Well, TikTokers, it's been a very very interesting few days. Yesterday, somebody with an X account or a Twitter account with 175 million followers intervened again against the hate speech bill, which is currently going through the Irish Senate. And of course, this is Elon Musk. It's also been the debate is also getting contributions from Conor McGregor with his 10.5 million followers. And then there is a Californian activist, writer, and environmentalist, Michael Schellenberger, also wading into the same issue. And why is this happening now? Well, it's very straightforward. The hate speech bill itself is complete overreach. It creates a situation where you could be prosecuted for a thought, and that you have to prove yourself innocent. You have to prove yourself innocent, that you're guilty until you do that. And why is that? I mean, if you get engaged in a debate with somebody, or somebody overhears you, they can make a complaint. That complaint would have to be investigated. That would allow a Garda to go and get a warrant from a judge to come into your home, take your mobile phones, your laptops, and those of your family members, including your children, to look for any content that might be deemed to be hateful or might incite hatred towards a named minority. And there's a long list of them involved in the bill. Even though you may not have that intention at all, you might have been just doing research for a book. Or it might be just accidentally on your devices, and you might say, well, there's no way that a judge in Ireland would allow such a prosecution to go through, and that may very well be the case in most cases. But you're going to spend at least 2 years of your life, maybe longer, in the horrors being brought through the prosecution system in Ireland. This is nuts, and yet it's there. And why is it there? Well, that's why Musk is so concerned about it, because the centre of the American technology industry is the Republic of Ireland, and this is an attempt to silence the Irish. And it's not just this particular bill, which I'll come to in a moment, but there is a petition that you can sign, put together by a little activist group called Free Speech Ireland. You'll find it on X. You'll find it on other social media. You can sign that, and that petition is now building to try and stop this bill. It's not too late. It hasn't gone through the Senate yet, and then it would have to go off to Michael D. Higgins in the Áras for signature. So it's not a done deal by any way, shape, or form. Now, why all this is quite alarming is because it's not the first bus that's coming at us to try and clamp down on free speech. We can see this in the World Health Organization treaty. I've spoken about this before. That's coming along between May and August, and this is an attempt to get us to sign an international treaty which will compel us to clamp down on disinformation and misinformation that might be unfavourable to the policies of the World Health Organization. Now, why is that so deeply ironic? Well, when you look at the WHO, which is an unelected body in Geneva, in which the Gates Foundation is the largest contributor, and also happens to be one of the largest, Bill Gates himself, one of the largest investors in the pharmaceutical industry in the world, they want to have this treaty put in place in order to get ready for the next pandemic. But there's huge questions outstanding. I mean, we can all see that the greatest source of disinformation, which is a fancy word for lies, and misinformation is actually the state itself. It's coming from the top. That's where most of the disinformation and misinformation has come from for the last 3 years. We were told this was a pandemic. Was it indeed? The OECD have just said there was no excess deaths in Ireland in 2020, nor for the years that followed. That's what they said. That's the science of the goddamn thing. Well, if there was no excess deaths, how was there a pandemic? The definition of pandemic itself was changed a few years before it actually happened. And then we had so-called vaccines, but they weren't vaccines, were they? They didn't stop anything. They didn't stop the transmission of the disease, although we were told it would. That was disinformation, wasn't it? And that we were misinformed about the PCR test itself, which was set at 45 cycles. Was it a pandemic or was it a PCR-demic? Creating a disease or a contagion where none really existed. I mean, you could theoretically set the PCR cycle to a point where it would identify the bubonic plague and the Justinian plague still in the population. I mean, they're the brutal facts of it. Yes, it was a bloody awful disease, especially if you were old or infirm or you had serious underlying health problems like a lot of Americans do, which is why they had such a large problem with it over there in terms of the number of deaths and the number of injuries created by it. But the question is, was it a pandemic? I mean, we were told that these vaccines, in inverted commas, were so important that those that weren't taking it were basically persona non grata, going into pubs and restaurants throughout the country, and they were vilified in the media and demonised. We went even so far as to suggest that people waiting for organ transplants in Beaumont Hospital would be thrown off the list if they didn't get jabbed, even though getting jabbed could have been very dangerous to them. And what about the Hippocratic Oath? Remember that idea that you shouldn't do any harm? Why were we jabbing children when we knew that the risk levels from these emergency use drugs were actually higher than the actual risks from COVID itself to children because of the strength of their little immune systems? Why were we doing that in order to protect Granny and Grandad? I mean, that was nuts. And we were supposed to get informed consent. What kind of informed consent when we didn't know exactly what was in these batches of these emergency use drugs that we all took, and myself included? And now we're looking at the data coming through of potential vaccine harm, across many vectors of human health. We were told that the spike protein would just go as far as, the injection site and wouldn't transmit to the rest of the body. Well, that turned out to be disinformation and misinformation, because it has travelled. And there are very substantial question marks over the damage being done to the repair structure of the human immune system from these emergency use authorised drugs. I mean, they're just the basic facts. Now, people say, oh, well, that's conspiracy theory. Well, no, it isn't. What's hidden about it? And, when you ask people, well, what is the conspiracy theory? It's always met by deafening silence. It's just the trope that's thrown out there to say, please don't bother me with this. This is all in the rear view window. Well, it's not, because you can still see the things clicking into place. We see it with the World Health Organization Treaty. We see it with the hate speech bill. This week in Davos, which is rattled by what's gone on in Berlin. You might say, well, what happened in Berlin? Well, the Germans were out in force with, the German farmers and truckers were out in force. They closed down Germany, large parts of it, but you didn't read about it in mainstream media in Ireland. And it's been spreading to other countries, including France and Italy. It's been in Holland. And the farmers are just saying, no, we've had enough of this nonsense, this green policy agenda. And Tedros, who is the head of the World Health Organization, Uncle Teddy to you, is now linking climate change to the World Health Organization Treaty, which we're expected to sign. Well, we're not going to goddamn well sign it, because we have rights under Crotty from 1987 to a public referendum, and we will be insisting on a public referendum under Crotty. And then the Irish can publicly debate everything that has occurred on the WHO watch. And we can really look at the disinformation and misinformation that has been knocking around through all of the vectors that flow from that, and from the World Economic Forum, and from other transnational institutions over those years, down through the mainstream media in Ireland, and down through the health establishment. I mean, there's 19,000 members of the Medical Council, but only a handful of them stood up and said, there's something wrong here. Well, let me tell you, there is something wrong here. And what's wrong is being discussed. It's just not being very, very well discussed in Ireland. It's certainly not being explored, except by the likes of Grip Media and one or two politicians. We're just burying our head in the sand. It's not going to work, because these things are coming to the surface. But one of the things that is quite clear is that you won't silence the Irish. This hate speech bill, you may argue that no judge will prosecute under it, but you could spend 2 or 3 years of your life in really serious difficulty going through the prosecution system in Ireland over something absolutely inane and silly. And that's what we're facing. It's absolutely crazy. And you might say, it couldn't be happening. Well, actually, listen to me very carefully. You've heard from me many times over the years, including in Rip Off Republic. This is happening. It's happening on your watch. And if you don't know about it, you should go and damn well find out about it, because it affects you, everybody that you love, your friends and your family. That's how serious this issue is. And it's happening here in the Republic of Ireland because we are the centre of US technology when it comes to Europe, as well as the pharmaceutical industry. That's why Ireland is so important, and that's why it's been getting attention. So please get up to speed on this. Go on X, go on social media, find out about this hate speech bill, sign the petition, and then get involved in the campaign which will follow in order to insist that the Irish public get their rights under the Supreme Court ruling on Crotty to a referendum on the World Health Organization Treaty. And let's put a run on these 21st century totalitarian mindsets that are behind much of this. And this is a message to all those who value freedom and who value liberty and understand the implications of these things, until we stand up collectively and say, you'll never beat the Irish.